and an associate professor in Africana Studies at the University of Arizona. He specializes in African American literature of the 20th century with a primary focus on the Harlem Renaissance. He has published numerous articles on his doctoral project, Virtual Harlem, which you might have heard of, which is an immersive representation of a portion of Harlem, New York as it existed during the 1920s jazz age and the Harlem Renaissance. And we invited Brian in here to speak with us several years ago, and I just fell in love with his work and thought this would be a great opportunity to spread that information a bit further. The Virtual Harlem project was one of the earliest full virtual reality environments created for use in the humanities, and certainly one of the first for use in an African American literature course. Virtual Harlem has been presented at venues in Paris, the Netherlands, Sweden, Hungary, and multiple sites in the U.S. Dr. Carter's research centers on how the use of traditional and advanced interactive and immersive technologies changes the dynamic within the learning space. Today he will focus on issues related to maintaining and supporting digital humanities projects. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Brian Carter.
Thank you very much, everyone. Am I going to have to stand back here? Okay, all right, great, because I like to move around a lot, so thank you all for being here. First of all, I'm going to be speaking to you today from two hats. The first one is going to be from a faculty member who uses a variety of technologies to engage students in so many different ways. And then the second one is going to be from someone who directs a Center for Digital Humanities and is very interested in supporting faculty members who are interested in doing innovative work with their research, with their teaching, and bringing students into the fold, so to speak, with regards to engaging them even further in very different ways. Just about every university that we have here today, in the world almost, is dealing with various forms of student engagement. And I think it's very interesting when we start to look at not only how students are being engaged, but also how the initiatives are taking place on a number of campuses. For instance, at my university, we have a program called the 100% Engagement Program, which basically means that courses that the faculty members considers engaging, which have to fall into several criteria to include things like intercultural competency, digital literacies, and so on and so forth. We have to go through an approval process, and once the engagement committee deems that course an engagement course, then students that take that course have an addendum on their transcript that describes the actual engagement activities. So in addition to a letter grade, that goes along with the transcript to prospective employers, graduate schools, and all sorts of things. So the 100% engagement program is something that is really quite interesting and something that we use as sort of a recruiting tool for our students. And I'm sure these kinds of engagement conversations are occurring on a number of campuses, both here and in other locations. What I'd like to do is describe to you a couple of different ways that I've incorporated engagement types of activities in both a face-to-face class as well as an online class. Now, when you think about engaging students in an online class, once again, there's so many ways to do that. There's no one right or wrong way to do it. It's just the effectiveness in which those engagement activities are actually implemented. So the first class is really related to one of the passions that I teach. As you heard when Tom was reading my bio, my passion is literature. I teach the Harlem Renaissance, and so I've always been interested in how to get students to be passionate about that period as I am. And that's really what the basis or the genesis of the Virtual Harlem project was all about. By teaching, and just keep that story short, but in teaching Harlem Renaissance courses when I was a graduate student, I wanted my students to love the literature and be able to envision the things that may have inspired Langston Hughes or Countee Cullen or Zora Neale Hurston about the period, and get excited about it as I was, but they couldn't, and they were just reading it, and it dawned to me that perhaps they had a difficult time visualizing and interacting with that space. So that was the genesis of Virtual Harlem. So when you think about how to engage students in a period that most have probably never heard the history of, I think that really spawned how I envisioned incorporating engagement types of activities in this first class. Now, AFAS 421, Africana Studies is the designator. 421, it's a 400 level course, so usually sophomores and up typically take that one, although I have had some freshmen in it. This is a class designed around African Americans in Paris. And very, very few people know that history with regards to the presence of African American expatriates, either living, working, or visiting Paris from the turn of the 20th century until very close to the present. So in order to understand the Harlem Renaissance, once again, you have to understand what was happening in Paris, particularly just after World War I. So I thought this was going to be really interesting, and of course the highlight of that class is a field trip to Paris over spring break. We used to do it over Thanksgiving break, but we moved it to spring break. So this class is very, very interesting for students, particularly those that have never considered or that only maybe partially considered studying abroad. And I'll tell you more about that when we get to the study abroad types of engagement activities. So this is an in-person class. And it's one that, because I designed it around production-oriented activities, I was able to access a classroom space at my university that we've been redesigning a number of classes to make them more engaging. So the theater-style lecture halls are no longer as popular or as numerous on my campus. We've turned those into open space rooms, very similar to this, where the 4-person tables and the chairs can be moved around. There are monitors all over the place, and Apple TVs and Amazon shared devices or Android shared devices, so you can throw your video or what have you up onto whatever screen. There are microphones all over the place and cameras, so it's really it's set up to incorporate production and technology and engage students very differently. And so I was able to access one of those classrooms, and those classrooms are typically configured for about 70 people or so. My class was about 30. And so I really thought, how can I use this space to engage students very differently? So what we did was we set up a green screen area in one corner of the room. We set up a broadcasting area in another corner of the room and used some small partitions. We had some other brainstorming areas in one corner of the room where whiteboards were and everything. And then, of course, we had a bank of computers in another corner of the room. So in addition to learning and reading about this wonderful history of African Americans in Paris, reading histories of people like Ada Bricktop Smith and Langston Hughes' travels over there, and of course even Josephine Baker. You can't talk about that without even bringing up her. But we also tasked students to demonstrate their understanding of that period through production-oriented activities. And we'll see some examples of that here in just a few moments. So the AFAS 421 class was one that was set up to allow students to express that understanding as creatively as possible about whatever that course material happened to have been. And then, of course, when we take the field trip to Paris, that takes on a whole new level of documenting their experience. The digital storytelling that we have incorporated there, and then the other technologies that we employ, like augmented reality and digital mapping, are ones that engage students not only in the place that they happen to be, but also in the content that relates to that place that may be a little bit non-traditional, in fact, very non-traditional. Not many tourists know or go where we go when we go to Paris, and it's really quite an interesting experience. What I've always believed is that by creating these engaging activities, it creates memorable experiences. And whenever you can create memorable experiences, that's when you really have learning going on, because students recall much more than just something that they, of course, may have read in a text. We'll see some examples of some of the things that they did in the 421 class here in just a moment. But I'm going to move to the AFAS 160 class. Now, this is an introduction to African American literature, And I'm very passionate about that as well, because while you're teaching African American literature, particularly an introductory class, you often, in fact, you always have to teach history to go along with that, because a majority of my students are not students of color, and a majority of the students that I have are ones that are products of the same educational curriculum that I was a product of, where there were very, very few underrepresented groups represented or presented in that material. Most times when they were mixed in with everyone else, and so therefore you had no real focus or concentration on any one ethnic minority group here in America, all sort of crammed into American history or American literature or whatever the case might be, which is fine in some respects. But when you think about how when you minimize the contribution of others to the building of the United States, that creates various stereotypes. And so by teaching that history, it gets me excited, but I think it also gets students sort of the. Have any of you seen or heard of the old radio broadcast called Paul Harvey? Remember Paul Harvey? Remember his show, The Rest of the Story, that came on later on in the afternoon? Paul Harvey, for those of you that don't know anything about him, he was this newscaster, and he had these really interesting newscasts that were very short in the mornings, and then in the afternoons he had Paul Harvey, The Rest of the Story. So the rest of the story in here is what students really get a chance to take hold of and really understand why we're in various situations now that we are in, because these are issues that continue to, anyway, so the way that you engage students in an online class is interesting. Have any of you taught online before? A few people? Okay, so traditionally, online classes are, and I've taken them and taught them, they're traditionally using some sort of course management system, and usually the assignments and readings are placed in a folder, and of course, those folders are made available at the beginning of the week, the assignments are due at the end of the week, and students sometimes wait until Sunday midnight to try to submit an assignment that's due by 12:01. So we know how that goes. Sometimes students feel, and at least I felt, a little bit lonely in those classes. I felt like I wasn't really engaged, and I felt that I was just kind of going through the motions, not really learning anything, just kind of memorizing stuff to get through a test. Well, so that's a difficult nut to crack when you think about the growing popularity of online education. Of course, we know economics has a lot to do with that, but anyway, when you think about how online education is growing so rapidly, we as educators, we've got to figure out ways to capture those students' imaginations and attention while also engaging and teaching them as effectively as possible, while also, of course, satisfying, this thing for numbers that most universities have to do in order to make money. And so when you think about broadcasting, we have a lot of opportunities there. My AFAS 160 class is situated so that students may optionally attend live broadcasts at 7 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. And out of a 800-person online class, almost 250 or so attend the live broadcast, which of course they receive a little bit of extra credit points for doing so. But of course, that those live broadcasts are really intended to engage them differently. Now, of course, they can attend using their phones, their tablets, their computers, and I know a lot just kind of roll out of bed and hit the button, and they're attending class, sideways while they're still, half asleep, and that's fine because the things we talk about, I think, may wake them up. And so we watch video clips. Some students actually do their presentations within Google Hangout. You all have used that, or we use Zoom, whichever one fits the bill best. And so that really is part of the engagement. But to engage those online students further, of course, things like polls are incorporated to keep them engaged ongoing throughout the 45-minute broadcast. So to broadcast a poll and have them actually have to hit a button on their screen in order to demonstrate to me that they're indeed awake and paying attention is one way. We do a word cloud within that particular class, and so one of the assignments is called the Intellectual AV Mix. You're going to see an example of that here in just a moment. We talk about plausible topics for that particular assignment throughout the assigned readings, and so students are constantly building this word cloud based on things that they hear me or their classmates talking about during that live broadcast. I was telling Tom last night that I was so excited because the newest iteration of this live broadcast, and I'm actually simulcasting now, is so exciting for me that I can't wait to see how it evolves. I just got one of the Insta360 Pro 360 cameras. It's about that big, and it's got like maybe 8 cameras going all the way around it, and I've got it sitting in the middle of my office. And so I just started broadcasting in 360 to my students, and I've given about half a dozen of them 360 headsets, the ones that you put your phone in, turn it sideways, hit the button, and the screen divides, and then you're sort of immersed in that particular environment. So what I'm curious about, and what I think will be really quite an interesting set of reactions from the students, is what difference it makes if a student is virtually immersed in my office and I'm talking to that person as if they're there, versus maybe watching that same broadcast on a flat screen, versus maybe listening to it, which some students do because they're actually commuting into campus at that time of the broadcast, and they want to get the extra credit points. I know how that goes. But imagine being in someone's office during the live broadcast, which I think will be quite interesting. And so I've asked them to give me a bit of a reaction at the end of the semester, which I think will increase the level of engagement, or the level of connectivity at least, with me. I know we're still working on the user interface. We're trying to figure out ways that within a headset you can still do things with maybe a controller or something. And with the new Oculus Go, you can do that because you can bring up a web browser and you can do all sorts of very interesting things. So I think there's some cool possibilities with regards to engagement, even in an online setting, that we're going to be seeing some examples of here in just a moment. Okay, so before we move on, let me show you some video clips of some of the things that I've been referring to, and then we'll get into some of the other aspects that I'd like to cover today. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that one of the ways that we're able to get students involved in engaged in various ways is through a technology called augmented reality. And getting students connected to our research is, of course, one of the ways that we can engage them very, very interestingly. And one of my areas of research is AR, connected to a project dealing with the Harlem Renaissance project that I'll get into a little bit later on. So a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine in Paris asked if I would be interested in helping to augment an art exhibit. And that art exhibit was on a painter named Buford Delaney, who was very popular in Paris during the 1950s, and many of his works were stolen or disappeared after he was committed to an insane asylum. So they were rediscovered recently and put on display for the very first time. So students that were in my class previously, the previous semester, that had done projects, engagement projects dealing with augmented reality, it was really cool. They did something on the Harlem Renaissance, and they put pictures all over the walls, and we, using an application called Blipper, were able to go around the room and actually see additional information on our mobile devices related to those writers and artists of the Renaissance. So those same students, 6 of them, were sponsored to go to Paris with me, and I'd like to share with you their experience there, because they did all of the work. It was really quite interesting.
I think that the fantastic thing about the Africana Studies is that it teaches you
This was at Reed Hall, that's run by Columbia University. They have a location there in Paris that they have classes and workshops and all types of exhibits. So the students were able to record a spoken word artist in front of a green screen, as you can see here. This is the curator of the exhibit. And then that evening, over the next several evenings, they were able to put that footage together using the Blipper application and using fairly high resolution images of these prints. We then went back over the next several days and began to test and then modify whatever the issues were. And this was a soiree. This was the actual art exhibit, the opening night, and students were able to show the visitors not only how the application worked, but also get a chance to really be a part of this artistic community that came out for this opening. So you can imagine these kinds of memorable events or activities not only create those long-lasting memories for students, just like when you all visited Nepal. These things are things you'll never forget. Even the eccentricities of the artists that carry potatoes around in their pockets. So the students just had an amazing time. And we'll stop that one. So when you think about what students can actually learn during these kinds of experiences, it's not just the technology, it's how to apply that technology, which then engages them on an entirely different level with regards to creating these kinds of memorable experiences. Did I lose connection here? Let's see what's going on. Okay, so as I mentioned before, engaging the students through these kinds of study abroad experiences really does change the entire dynamic of not only what happens in the traditional classroom, but also what happens with regards to the ways that they can recall this information later on. Now, digital narratives in the classroom are part of what are involved in all of these classes that I teach. The African Americans in Paris class, I teach Harlem Renaissance courses, Afrofuturism, and they all incorporate a level of production on a variety of levels. Students are tasked to do an assignment that is named the Intellectual AV Mix. And this is an offshoot of an assignment that a colleague of mine did a number of years ago called the Intellectual Mixtape. But I've just incorporated a different level of audio-visual. So students choose a topic related to the course content. If it's African American literature, anything related to African American life, literature, or culture. If it's the Harlem Renaissance, of course, that specific period. Afrofuturism, you know, a bit wider, but still that particular subject matter. They must, as a part of their assignment, incorporate 2 audio clips, 2 video clips of no longer than 2 minutes, and then their intellectual commentary tying all of those things together, perhaps with images or whatever other sorts of audio, video, or visuals they may want to incorporate. Now, they may display this information in a variety of ways. Some choose to create a movie project. They're familiar with iMovie or Final Cut Pro or Adobe Premiere. Some choose to create a website, and they can then linearly place these multimedia items in any order on the website that they like. Some choose to create a digital magazine, and there are a variety of applications out there right now that allow students to create digital magazines where, very similar to a website, they have these interactive elements, and then of course you have the page turning animation and things like that with any other sorts of video elements that they might want to incorporate into that magazine. And then finally, some students choose to use 360 technology. And there are some really great applications that allow them to tell stories using 360 technology. And you're going to see examples of all of that here in just a moment. So let me just show you some examples of what students are doing here that will give you a sense of these 360 activities.
President Trump overnight forced to answer the one question he cannot seem to escape.
Why you wanna catch my eye when you already know that I'm taking? Nah, like Billy. How you pass due on payments and I'm seeing you on vacation? Nah, like Billy. How you gonna make us great when we were never really that amazing? Nah, like Billy. Take it back to what? On fine, hanging black lives entertaining. Nah, like Billy. How do you police the streets of a neighborhood you do not engage in? Nah, like Billy. Why brother get 3 for a sack when your brother go free for a raping? Nah, like Billy. How you make a film about Egypt where all the heroes Caucasian? Nah, like Billy. How you saying all lives matter when it's that saying we are not adjacent? Nah, like Billy. Tell me if I got it all wrong. Like a sign on the line, but I can't read the form. And the fine print is all about the time. Need more than the color of my skin, man. I gotta be strong. Damn faith said that I was reborn when I take my last breath. And you're living born in. As of right now, we can never be pals. So how are we supposed to get along? Nah, like Billy. This now more than ever though. All about force and message though. Nah, like Billy. Why am I forced to let it go and clean your message though? Nah, like Billy. You take jobs to Mexico, pay us less and less though. Nah, like Billy. Promise to bring them back and that problem gets the vote. Nah, like Billy.
Visualize with visual eyes. Skyscrapers that scrape the sky. Elections that elected and
The
shun.
student wrote this
Decency is
himself.
no longer decency. Black folks aren't allowed to protest, obviously. They say stop being violent, take a knee. But not during that song. The president says that's wrong. As the world turns and people learn, it's not just as simple as get out there and earn. Some folks have it worse than others. Some folks didn't have suburban mothers. Some folks don't have it like me or you. And all they're trying to say is we matter too. We've got all these amendments, but we've forgotten what amend meant. We care more about protecting the second one that gives us all the guns than we do the 14th, 4th, or 1st. Sometimes it feels like we're the worst. Do we deserve it? This pile of shit? I just don't know how we're gonna rise above it. We're all a bunch of pawns, from the grade school to the White House lawn. Just cogs in the wheel, another chump. It doesn't surprise me that we're left with Trump. The news used to educate, now they seem to propagate. They drop bombs of fear over large areas, weapons of mass hysteria. Like K-Dot said, we gon' be alright, and I believe that with all my might. But we need to realize with our real eyes, the answer is not to internalize or put on armor for a social media war. Keyboard warriors live to abhor, and say things to a screen, not to a human. Nothing but vitriol in their political acumen. Not me. I look folks in their eye while I rationalize with rational eyes the complexities of complex cities. They condemn Kaepernick. He's insulting our vets. Stupid people. A veteran told him to take a knee. You forget? Time to realize that we're being fed real lies. Open your fucking eyes.
Tell me why you don't love me. Why you always misjudge me? Why you always put so many things above me? Why you lead me to believe that I'm ugly? Why you never trust me? Why you treat me like I don't matter? Why you always kicking my ladder? Why you never hear on my side to the story? Never let me in my eyes to say sorry. Cause America don't love me. Whole country turned on me. There's no love in the city for the homies. Just a king of police. Pray they don't ever catch it on me. Lord, America don't love me. Whole country turned on me. There's no love in the city for the homies. Just a king of police. Pray they don't ever catch it on me. Lord.
When you think about what students are actually able to learn through these kinds of examples and these kinds of projects, not only do you have to do all that research and pull all those media sources, but the poem that he wrote, oh my gosh, he read that in class, and I asked him if he would consider using that in his project, because he hadn't considered doing that. And when he thought about it, he was like, yeah, that is a good application. So thinking about how they can apply their existing talents and use those to express their understanding of course content, amazing. I had another student that actually did a project using an application that we're going to be looking at during our workshop this afternoon, and it's one called Round Me. Have any of you used that application with the 360 camera before? No? When you think about taking 360 images, you know, the 360 world is exploding right now. We're going to talk about that during our workshop, the different kinds of cameras that you might consider and all those kinds of things, along with maybe some of your experiences and ideas. But 360 images, you have to use a certain type of application in order to display those over the web or in order to share those images with anybody. I mean, it's great to take them and you can see them on your phone. You can see them in specialized applications. This application is one that allows you to not only link 360 images, but also embed audio cues within those 360 images that are spatialized. So in other words, when you're facing an audio bite, an MP3 that's playing, when you turn away from it, that sound fades out and the next one fades in. So it's really kind of nice to give you that 360 audio immersion as you're experiencing the 360 image immersion. Now we're going to sit down and we're going to actually be looking at this through the website, but imagine using a set of headsets that you can actually use with this application, and it uses gaze technology in order to navigate you the same way to different images that I'm going to be using my mouse for. So that's how you would navigate this if you're using one of the low-cost 360 headsets or Google Cardboard. So excuse my sitting down for a second. But this application was done by a student that was interested in bringing to light some of the concerns or issues related to the DACA students that are very, very heavily represented at my university in Arizona. So, of course, with 360 images, you know that you can look around, and if we were wearing a headset, we would basically be able to turn our head and look around. But what you'll see within this, and I'm just going to go ahead and bring up the audio. There we go. What you can see within this is that we've got cues here that allow us to navigate to different 360 images that she's incorporated. So we're going to go to a couple here. And I'm not sure why my audio's not on. Let me see. There we go. And so we get some information related to what's going on with DACA and some of the other textual information. She was able to add images through Photoshop and then re-import this into this application. And I'm not sure why my audio's not on. Let's see if I can there we go. We can barely hear that a little bit. Yeah, it might just be a little bit low. But anyway, when you face away from that, of course, the audio fades out, but she's really telling the story about some of the experiences of DACA students. We can jump from 360 image to 360 image, and we're able to...
I don't even know if I would have brothers and sisters. I might have been an only child, and I might not be the person I am today. I want to work hard and push forward and give myself a better life. The life my parents came looking for here, and the life they wanted me to have. This place is my home, and I don't want to be treated any different from those who were born here. I want to work hard and push forward, and this is where I grew up. I learned English and called this place home. My memories of my birthplace are very few. When I heard DACA was going to be established, I was full of joy. I fell to the ground crying, thinking, I can be a normal teenager and get my first job and my license, something I thought would never be possible. I came to the U.S. at a very young age, almost 3 years old. I want to work hard my whole life for it. This is where I grew up. I learned English and called this place home. My memories they wanted me to have. This place is my home, and I don't want to be treated any different from those who were born here. I want to work hard and push forward.
And and see another exit back or what have you. But anyway, I think you get the point with regards to how an application like this can really engage students very differently. She had to go out and get some of her friends, take these 360 images, use this application, stitch those images together with regards to linking them, and then of course tell that digital story. In order to tell that story effectively, she had to know the history of what was going on in that particular situation. So I really do think that this and of course other applications that we're going to be looking at during our workshop today really do engage students on a completely different level. How are we doing the time, Tom? Okay, great. As I mentioned before, the study abroad trip is really quite an interesting experience that we now have additional opportunities to tell, to encourage students to tell digital stories very, very differently. When you think about using 360 cameras and study abroad, it takes it to a whole new level. And I'd like to show you a couple of the video clips that students took while they were there, keeping in mind that this is only day one or one of the many experiences the students had. And I tasked them, in addition to choosing a project of their own design while they're in Paris, I tasked them to also talk about different points to ponder that I give them at the beginning of each day related to the activities that we do while we're there. For instance, if we're going to take a tour of the left bank, particularly the house where Richard Wright may have lived, or where Langston Hughes may have hung out, or where the Sorbonne is, I ask a question related to that, or a series of questions, and sometime during the day, students, either alone or with groups, must somehow respond to that particular question. So I've had them put the 360 camera in the middle of the table while they're at a cafe, and they just have these conversations. And so we take all of that footage, and then we mash that up, and last year we were able to see that in our planetarium dome. It was really a cool experience, but we learned some really interesting lessons there, because the shoulders of that dome were so high, and we had the cameras kind of elevated, we only saw like this much of people. So we just learned if we're going to do that for this year, we have to lower the camera, that way we'll see more of people, just the way that their dome format stitches those images together, or converts it rather, to that. So what I'd like to show you here are some of the ways that students were able to not only discover new uses for this particular type of technology, but imagine how these were able to then be later stitched together.
See, get in there.
Yes, you can.
Yes, you can. Come on the other side.
Come on, there you are. Hello.
Okay.
Last night was such a struggle, guys.
Try not your holiday languages.
Yes.
So,
For 20 seconds. Day 2. Hello. So, tell them about our sleeping last night.
we slept basically sitting up.
Yep.
So, with 2 chairs.
On a twin-sized bed.
Let's start with the whole thing yesterday. So we first get here, Malia almost killed us.
Not even in the room for 5 minutes before we blow up the power.
Yeah, so
I.
Okay, there we go. So Malia.
Have it.
So Malia blew out the power. The room was hot. Kiana and I were in the room with like the twin beds, and that room was really hot. They were in the family room with the couch, but we didn't realize that there's a trundle bed under the bed. So they slept sitting up.
It's really uncomfortable.
Very uncomfortable. Yeah. And
You don't know how to work the air.
ooh, okay.
Siri, you're still on the camera.
How are they?
Because it's 360.
Oh my god.
That is so cool.
Oh my god. Okay. You got my good angle.
Yes.
Woo!
This is so
Look,
exciting.
it's like you guys, you viewers are under the umbrella with us.
We could still start a YouTube channel with this.
Wait, put it on us.
Oh.
Yay!
Okay, cool. We'll update this later.
Show them the building.
Oh, yeah, no,
We're walking. Okay,
this
there's
is
a hole.
beautiful.
Absolutely
I
gorgeous.
Spanish. Wow.
So wait, put it on Kiana real quick. So we're at breakfast at the hotel, right? Kiana pulls some Ziploc baggies out her purse. It says that they're for her croissants for later. Why are we really only in Paris for 2 days, already cutting up?
Hi, Keita.
Okay.
I'm a real nigga.
I don't know if we can put that on the website.
No, we can't.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.
Okay. Bye. Bye for now. See you.
Imagine the fun that they had. And you can see that not only did they discover new uses for this technology, but they were having fun doing it. And this is part of what creates those memorable experiences that I think will last a lifetime. We had another student that actually visited the catacombs. And the catacombs in Paris take on a very interesting flavor when you 360 video it.
We made it to the quarter. That's what's holding up the line, is just the process of getting the ticket.
That's the poet in the last video. Have any of you been to the catacombs in Paris before? You descend about 3 stories, it seems, down under the streets of Paris, and the catacombs are beautifully designed structures made of human bones, skulls and femurs and whatever, and they're shaped like hearts, and they spell words and all sorts of designs, and millions of people that were buried down there. These bones were designed very intricately. There have been some horror movies that have been made down there and stuff like that.
Yeah, true.
So they're still going down. By the way,
because it was for disease, so they must have buried it very deep.
Yeah, exactly. So now imagine coming back up these stairs. It wasn't very pretty, for some at least.
It was one of those walking down Eiffel Tower, Dad.
Why I go you probably just
There you go. All right, so yeah, a little metro. We are.
So once again, that's just the start of his adventure. And his adventure continues with going through the catacombs and getting up close to these bones and starting to tell the story that he's reading on the walls or trying to decipher in French. But once again, you can imagine that these kinds of digital stories, these narratives, these expressions of their experience are ones that create these memorable experiences that I really do appreciate students being able to share with us. Now, one of the new technologies that I'll be introducing to students this year that actually is a year old, but it just came out last year, so it was too late for me to introduce them to the last spring break group of students, is a combination of 360 images and or video and augmented reality in an application that we're actually going to be trying out for some of you that have iOS devices during our workshop this afternoon. And this is one that's a really cool iOS device that some of you may have seen, but it allows you to create sort of portals in the real world, walk through those portals, and then be able to experience the virtual world that you have taken with either 360 images or 360 video. So to be able to incorporate digital storytelling in that respect, where students are virtually taking a user through the use of video from their selfie video, and they're showing these different portals, and I'm going to show you an example here, and then being able to walk through those and teleport people to another part of Paris is really going to open the possibilities of the types of digital stories that students might be able to tell. So let me just show you this, and you'll get an example of what I'm talking about.
All right, here I am at the Fountain of Saint Michel, and I've got 4 portals open, and let's see if we can walk inside each one of them and see where we are. This one has us on the inner courtyard of the Sorbonne. You can look around here, not many people get a chance to see the inside of that. We can look back out into our portal at the fountain. And of course, there we are back inside of the courtyard of the Sorbonne. Who's that guy? All right, let's head back out again. Let's see where the second portal leads us. It looks like we're on the banks of the Seine here, just in front of Notre Dame. There's our portal. Yep, and there's the traffic there near the fountain. There's that guy again. All right, let's head back out this one. Looks like our next portal's over here. I'll go ahead and enter that one.
So of course, while I'm filming this in front of the Fountain of Saint Michel, people thought I was crazy.
This is when I was sitting at a cafe at the base of Rue Moutarde. It's a nice little cafe. Let's head back out. And I believe our last portal is here. Here we are back on the banks, the bank of the Seine. Alright. So it looks like we can have at least 4 portals out, maybe even more. All right, here I am at the Fountain of Saint Michel.
And what I found through that experience is that you're actually able to use video within those portals. So now imagine being able to walk through one of these and you're within a video, a 360 video that's playing, along with the audio that accompanies that. So I really do think that these kinds of narratives, these kinds of experiences can really change the entire experience that a student has within a classroom. We looked at the round me already, and of course engagement through study abroad. Now, let me just change hats for a moment and talk to you a little bit about the Center for Digital Humanities that helps support these kinds of activities and even more. The Center for Digital Humanities, which I was asked to be the director of in July of 2017, is a relatively new, of course, center on campus. It was developed at the same time that our new Center for Buddhist Studies was developed. Our center has a very unique mission, and as I began to sort of conceptualize how this center can be shaped that would differentiate it perhaps from other centers for digital humanities around the nation, I noticed a couple of trends. There are many centers that, of course, all centers do some amazing work, particularly the one here, supporting workshops and faculty projects and all kinds of things that relate to, of course, digital humanities. Some other centers do summer institutes. Some award their faculty members cash awards in order to help produce their digital humanities projects. Some will support maybe a faculty release or whatever the case might be. I wanted our center to be a little different in that I saw when I was going through my DH sort of evolution, I noticed a few problems that I encountered, and I wanted to maybe help mitigate some of those same issues that maybe some of my colleagues might encounter at my university. So, at my school, there is a unit on campus called UA Global, which is basically under Global Initiatives, which used to be our Study Abroad. Their name has evolved over the number of years. And now they're UA Global. Within UA Global, they employ a group or support a group called Tech.Global. Tech.Global is comprised of a group of developers, undergraduate and graduate developers, coders, 3D modelers, graphic artists, media producers, media arts students, etc. And those students are paid approximately, I think, $12,000 or $18,000 a year, no, they work 18 hours a week, I'm sorry, and they earn some course credit, and they work on real-world projects. But when I heard about this group just launching a few months before the center was created, I thought that would be a great opportunity to get students involved in faculty projects. And what if we were to create a connection between that particular group, which is looking for projects, and these faculty members who are looking for developers for those projects, and how we can sort of merge these two groups together, or at least allow some sort of collaboration. So my college set up a memorandum of understanding with UA Global, and we were able to sponsor 3 students. A sponsorship seat costs approximately $12,000 or $15,000 or so, and that buys us a number of developmental hours, approximately 800 or so. So by sponsoring 3 seats, we multiply that by 8, and of course we have that many number of developmental hours that I can then award faculty members to help develop prototypes of whatever their project happens to be. So we've been able to, over the last year or so, support 9 faculty projects for a variety of prototypes that they are then able to use to submit with grant proposals and hopefully be competitive. We are just now coming around to our first round of faculty members whose projects were prototyped during the late part of the fall of 2017 and early 2018. Now they're starting to begin submitting their projects along with proposals to different funding organizations. During the latter part of the spring of 2018, I made another set of awards, and those faculty projects are being developed now, and by the end of the semester or early spring, they'll be submitting for a variety of funding opportunities. So we've been able to support a number of folks in the College of Humanities. And let me just take you to the website here, and you'll be able to see the types of projects that we've been able to support. So the Center for Digital Humanities, and when the site goes final, you'll be able to go to digitalhumanities.arizona.edu. This is the developmental site, and they're supposed to be done with this by next week, as a matter of fact, because there's a big DH conference dealing with African American digital humanities at the University of Maryland. For any of you that are interested in going, it seems like it's going to be really, really cool. It's the first of its kind. So the center really does focus on a number of things, and I'll just play this for you so you can hear a little bit more about it.
Welcome to the Center for Digital Humanities. This Center for Digital Humanities is designed to be a research incubator for faculty members to realize their digital humanities dreams. Although our center is primarily focused on digital humanities-based projects, we also have a keen interest in those projects related to diversity and marginalized communities. Unlike many centers around the United States, our Digital Humanities Center provides developmental support for faculty members that will then create pilot projects. Those pilot projects are then designed to be incorporated into proposals for grants, publications, and speaking engagements. A few of the things that you'll find in working with our center is that we're not afraid to explore new ideas. We work very hard to stay at the cutting edge of advanced visualization, and we definitely want to explore the latest and greatest tools in order to help you realize your digital humanities dreams. We look forward to working with you.
So we've been able to attract a number of faculty members that are doing a variety of projects that you see here. So I'll just run through these, and then later on during the workshop, we'll get into more of the mechanics of some of these projects if you want to talk about those, or maybe even during the question and answer period. So one of the projects that we're working on is an evolution of Pan-African dances. This one's really cool in that we were able to use motion capture technology in order to mocap a dancer who then chronicled the dances that evolved from Africa through South America, the Caribbean, and then to the Americas. And she was able to add unique aspects to those dances, which were then motion capped motion captured, and we were able to, of course, incorporate that onto avatars, and now then be able to help people visualize what those
This
dances
is a process that we followed for the development of the Dance Inspector and a showcase of how it looks like. We recorded the movement of our dancer using the Neuton Perception Neuron suit. Here, you can see highlighted what the straps look like. These straps are connected to systems called neurons, which act like sensors. We use Neuton's Axis Neuron software to receive and interpret the information from this device, and we recorded a varied set of dances for the prototype. Then, we connected Axis Neuron to Autodesk's Motion Builder. Using this software, we can give the motion that we captured with the sensors to different visual representations called models. We could also edit the animation in order to change or correct it, but in this case, we skipped the correction phase due to time. Here, we can see how the motion looks in the 3 different phases of the capture. First, the dancer in the real world, then Axis Neuron digitalizes the data, and finally, Motion Builder gives it its virtual image in the shape of a model. We could actually use any model that exists, but for this prototype, we chose a base model of a female. This is a dance called the butterfly. As you can see, there are 2 images doing it, a model and a skeleton. The skeleton is the information from Axis Neuron, and the final step is to merge it with the model so they can be one single file. This is how the prototype looks like. It is made in Unity for virtual reality, so naturally one can walk around the model to get any perspective and get as close as needed. And you can pause or rewind the animation to analyze it and understand the dance better. We chose Unity because it makes it easy to produce for different platforms, and availability is key to this project.
Now, of course, you may have seen some occlusion there and some other things that that probably could be corrected with regards to that. But you know, as the developer said, they did this very quickly. I think a couple of days or so. But this is just a project where the faculty member wants to eventually teach dance online. Believe it or not. We've done something with Russian foodways, where faculty members in both America, at my university, and in Russia were a part of a student exchange, and they wanted to do 360 videos of each location so that it would lower the inhibitions of students that were going to those locations prior to their arrival or departure. And they were able to not only see what the location looked like while being fully immersed there from a student perspective, but then when they got to their respective locations, they did a sustainable food project that they also filmed in 360 to document that experience. And so that sustainable food project, they were able to actually then look at similarities and differences between urban farms in Russia versus urban farms in Tucson, Arizona. So it was a really cool project, once again, sort of a service learning kind of project, but one that also created those memorable experiences. We have another faculty member doing research on black millennial spirituality, and looking at how Twitter primarily serves as a part of that spiritual sort of expression, and looking, you know, really at how Twitter explodes when something happens in the gospel world, and incorporating heat maps so that we'll be able to then be fully immersed on it, standing on a globe and watching these real-time Twitter feeds as they occur. Virtual Hangzhou was really kind of a cool project, and I'll show you that one. Some graduate students like yourselves went to Hangzhou, China, and they were able to incorporate 360 video to tell the story of their experience, to also begin documenting what the inside of this very ancient temple does. And our developers were also then able to incorporate virtual elements within a 360 video, birds flying and things like that. And we are eventually going to be incorporating avatar-like monks that will be doing ceremonies within this space, and then moving it to a fully computer-generated 360 experience that they're going to be recreating here very, very soon. Thank you. And then finally, we have the Virtual Harlem Project, which you'll see a little bit more in the workshop this afternoon, so I won't go into that. Last but not least, Zimbabwean sculptures. We have a faculty member that's traveling to Zimbabwe, and we were researching the best ways to 3D scan various types of sculpture in Zimbabwe for him. We found a very cool application for the iPhone, but that only does small sculptures, and then you have to put the object on a specialized mat. It does a good job, but it's just a little bit limiting. We're in the process of exploring now various 360 scanners, and maybe some of you who are in architecture might have some suggestions for us. But you can see the variety of projects that we're able to support, and we're really looking at supporting another round of those during the fall semester. So that's what we're doing at the University of Arizona. That's what I'm doing personally to engage students. And I think that when you think about how these two really work together, that's this sort of combined effort to not only engage students with digital humanities and engage them in the classroom, but also get faculty members involved in digital humanities projects and providing the support infrastructure in order to help them realize, as you saw in the video, their digital humanities dreams. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
How do you get the students to read?
To read? Well, of course, in my class, we don't discount reading. We just supplement that with all these other digital things. So the students are assigned to read, and of course, I have the standard quizzes and voice threads that they have to respond to the reading in various ways. And through our discussions, it's very easy to tell whether or not they've actually read the readings or if they're sort of fudging it and kind of tagging on to someone else's ideas. So we have some very good discussions, and it's really, really important that they stick to the reading, that they do those readings.
So the readings are posted, because what I'm hearing is a challenge that I face. So I use Tuscaloosa as a lab for the students to go out and discover our antebellum past, and I tell them it's not a field trip class. So if you don't do the reading, you don't have the context to understand this. So we're 7 weeks into the semester, and one of them says to me when I have this come to Jesus moment, like, this, you have a C right now, let's talk about why you have a C. She says, well, I just didn't know. And I said, well, did you do the reading? She says, I was supposed to really read? I was like, yeah. So you can have all of these wonderful moments of use technology, but you have to use some of these conventional approaches to learning as well. So I just want to know how you're getting them to do that. And
yeah, no, we have traditional reading assignments. Yeah, we have discussions, and it's really. And I'm glad you actually brought that up, because in these interactive classrooms, I opt for a Tuesday, Thursday session because you have longer periods, and so we're in this huge classroom, and we actually do spend at least the first 20 or so minutes discussing the reading specifically, and then the rest of the class period is used for that production stuff because they have to have that context. You're absolutely right. They got to know what they're talking about before they can begin producing anything. You're absolutely right. Other questions? Yes?
Yeah, what are the funding sources to run the projects and also maintain this center?
Excellent question. Okay, so and this is part of my stress, why I'm starting to get these gray hairs. When the dean asked me to be the director of this center, he gave me 5 years, actually 6, to become self-sufficient, or at least revenue zero. Or revenue positive. And so basically what I had to envision was not only how we could get faculty members to write grants, and then of course incorporate the center into that funding structure so that when those grants are awarded, we'll of course begin to earn that revenue that will then begin to pay our bills, the graduate assistant that I have, my little bitty stipend, and then of course to purchase the support from Tech.Global for the 3 seats that we're sponsoring, which $12,000, $15,000 times 3, and then any equipment and travel. So all those things came into a rather large budget that I started to look at. I was like, okay, how am I going to get self-sufficient in that period of time? Workshops and all those kinds of things. So yeah, that's still stressing me out a little bit. So right now the College of Humanities is supporting the budget that we have. We're looking at internal funding sources, external funding sources, sponsored research, as well as donors that I hope in the next few years will begin to supplement what we're earning, or what we hope to earn, through these various grant initiatives. Excellent question, though. Maybe you got some suggestions for me later. Yes?
Yes. I really enjoyed the intellectual AD mix examples that you gave. Phenomenal work. Could you describe a little bit the sort of the median project submission? The ones that because I'm kind of curious as to sort of what's sort of the average, you know, what does the average kind of submission look like in terms of what's turned?
Yeah, that's a great point, because you can tell that student was extremely talented, not only with iMovie, but also he's a talented poet, and he just had some very creative ideas. Most students will create a website. We're an Adobe campus, and so as a result of that, they have access to all of the Adobe Creative Cloud applications for free, and Adobe Spark Page is one of those. It's a very, very dead easy to use website creation tool, and so students will build a non-linear based project that they're required to. Their first video, if they do that, their first video must be an overview of what their project is about, why they did it, why they chose what they're doing, the sources that they use, and all that kind of stuff, sort of justifying or explaining what their project is. And then they can order those in any way that they want. And because it's so easy to use Adobe Spark Page, they're able to create those websites fairly easily. If we have time during the workshop, I'll bring one up for you and show you that, because they're very interesting. We had a student that did something on black female identity, which is really good, that I'll bring up for you, that is about the medium. So we have resources on campus that teach students how to do a lot of that, because some, you know, even though we assume students know how to download video from the web, how to cut that and trim the best 2 minutes out of that, and then incorporate that into whatever medium, a lot don't. And so we have a resource on campus called the iSpace, which is a part of our library system now. It's a makerspace, and they employ student assistants that will show other students how to do those very things. Download video, use video editing applications, audio editing applications. They have 3 green screen rooms for students that want to do any kind of that filming, any of that sort of filming. They have recording equipment, all sorts of things, and they'll show students how to do it hands-on. They have 3D printers and a CNC laser and stuff like that, so it's a really cool space for students to go in and really learn how to do those kinds of things. So those are the resources that are made available to my online students and face-to-face students, that all we have to do is announce it, give our assignment to the head of that unit, and that way he can then show the rest of his staff what the assignment is, and at least give them a heads up of the students that are most likely going to be coming over. Excellent question. Yes?
We were talking a little bit about readings before. I'm in the Department of Religious Studies here, so obviously our discipline is very text heavy. But as classrooms are becoming more inclusive of different types of learners, I'm just curious if your experience has been that bringing the digital humanities into the classroom helps the students who have trouble accessing the text.
I think it does, and not only because we have a very active disability resource center on my campus, and all students have to do is apply for that particular program. I don't know if there's a cost or not, I'm not sure, but they provide so many resources with regards to translation, with regards to what do you call it again when you turn text and turn speech into text?
Yeah,
you know what I'm talking about. What is it?
Transcription.
Transcription, thank you. Gosh, one of those mornings. Transcription. So they'll transcribe all of the live broadcasts that I do for free, and then have that as captions underneath. But I really do think that it gives students that do have various types of learning styles or learning disabilities to express their understanding very differently. So many students may not be comfortable in front of a camera, but they may be able to, say, record something or to draw something or to do something else that the technology enables in various ways. And it really just depends on what it is. So it's so difficult to pull one example out, because there's so many ways that the technology can help students. So yes, I do see that it does enable them differently. Yes?
So you mentioned this kind of fierce self-sustainability mandate that you're receiving
Yes.
students. And I wondered a little bit, to what extent does that drive what you look for in terms of success indicators for projects, or are there ways in which you struggle with that beyond just the sort of like scary element of it, but in terms of what you would want to see for projects and what kinds of arguments you're able to make for the projects and the technologies themselves?
Yeah, that's a great question, and let me just explain the whole workflow, which might in part answer that question. If I don't, then let's please just address it more. So the way that we've configured this, or that we've kind of envisioned this, is that faculty members that are interested in doing anything related to digital humanities will first have an informal conversation with me. And I'll hear about their research or hear about what they want to do and give them some ideas about some of the more modern or appropriate technologies that may work to enhance their research differently. So then based on that conversation, I then encourage them to submit a proposal during one of our rounds of proposals, and we do them twice a year, late fall and late spring. Once they do that, that proposal is then read by myself, the director of TechDoc Global, and the head of our, the Associate Dean for Innovation and Research in our college, who basically helps faculty members find grants and various funding opportunities. Once we then approve a set of proposals that sound very interesting and promising, because one of the criteria for faculty members that needs to come as part of the proposal that they have to do their due diligence and find one or two possible grant opportunities that they have at least looked at, that their project might be able to that they might be able to submit with their prototype project. Then we have pitch day. And pitch day allows faculty members to pitch their project idea to the three of us, myself, the head of Tech Global, and the Dean of Innovation. And that pitch day, the 10-minute pitch that they have to do, then allows them to explain what their project is all about. And we just have a conversation about what they envision, how they see their project evolving, maybe being sustained, if they get grant funding or not, and what they want to do with it. And then, of course, we discuss the various funding opportunities. If that project is funded, then those faculty members, of course, then meet with myself and my grad student. We begin to help them formulate their narrative for their proposal, and then we set up a number of meetings with the developer and the faculty member. And that faculty member then needs to meet a number of times with the developers so that they become comfortable and cognizant of how their own project is being developed. They need to know that, as opposed to getting just a final product back and not knowing what the deal is with that. So they have a number of project meetings, not only to deliver content, but also to receive some information. Then we deliver that prototype, and then faculty members use that to submit with potential funding opportunities. So yes, that does help drive some of the decisions with regards to what the three of us may think are most potentially fundable. But we also look at how some of these projects might forward a faculty member's academic careers, because I think that's very important, whether it's maybe fundable or not. We know that digital humanities is becoming more and more a part of tenure and promotion. And so we're really in it to help faculty members incorporate what they're doing into the tenure and promotion process so that they can really use that as part of their dossier, which is so very important, because the more we put into that, the more we can legitimize digital humanities as being viable for tenure and promotion projects, because a lot of work goes into that, like a publication in many respects. So yes, and then of course, outside of those two regular funding cycles, I also have outreach sort of ideas with different organizations on campus that are not a part of the College of Humanities. So I've made contact with our School of Architecture, interestingly enough, and we're creating a labyrinth, and they're working with a unit called Bio5 on my campus, which is sort of this bioengineering group. And they're working on recreating a labyrinth that they can measure levels of relaxation. So they needed someone to create that digitally and then incorporate all these other elements, and then they're going to put a brain scan on people and see. Yeah, so we look for those. But the Museum of Art on campus, so we make these outreach missions that may be potentially fundable, that are not a part of the college, which I think also drive the decisions as to who we work with. Additionally, we're working with international partners. We've got a partner in Singapore and partners in France that are doing interesting projects. And so depending on what they finally propose, we'll be looking at how they may be potential funding opportunities and collaborators as well. So we're really looking at partnering with a number of folks on campus in the city of Tucson, the state of Arizona, and then nationally and internationally to help with these sorts of ideas. So if you've got a project, come see me. Shameless plug, I know that was bad. Other questions? Yes?
You mentioned that you're making projects that will be useful to faculty members in terms of tenure and promotion. I wonder if you might want to say just a little bit more about that. Like, do these projects tend to count as for teaching credit or service credit, or are you doing things that count as scholarship for faculty? And if so, if it's in that third category, have you had to make an argument for that, or push the acceptance of digital humanity in departments, or say a little bit more, perhaps?
Okay. So it's different on every campus. First of all, at our university, we've adopted the suggestions by the Modern Language Association, which looks at digital humanities as both either scholarship or pedagogy. So it depends on what the project is, really. And so really just depending on what that faculty member's objectives are when they have that initial meeting with me, that's how we then begin to shape what their project is going to become and how we can then support that for whichever category they want to place that in for their dossier. So we have had some faculty members that are interested in doing straight pedagogical projects, and that's fine, but typically those are a few less hours, which are fine for us because they aren't very difficult to sometimes employ, and they're usually relatively short-lived with regards to the development, because whatever we do can then be used over and over and over again, maybe with some evolution in different classes the faculty member teaches. If it's a research project, we then encourage that faculty member to, like Tom does, remain sustained and engaged in that project for as long as possible, because the longer they remain engaged, the more publications they'll get out of it, which of course are that hard indicator of tenure and promotion. But also we see the creative aspects become more evolved as the technology evolves and as the faculty member provides more content, and then of course as we're able to work with the developers to really get that project to be something spectacular. So yes, it depends on what the project is and depends on how engaged that faculty member remains. Other questions? Yes?
I had another follow-up question about tenure and promotion. That's amazing that it's incorporated so early, it's so final in the entire process. It sounds like you have considerable buy-in from the deans also. Have you been able to communicate those kinds of tenure and promotion concerns across the departments with the assistance of the administration of the college, or is that also kind of...
Yes, actually, our whole university has really bought into. See, we just got a new president. I got to tell you the whole story. We just got a new president. We're going, of course, whenever you get a new administration, you go through a whole new strategic plan, right? Our last strategic plan incorporated 100% engagement and never settle, which was the mantra, which we retained some of that, the engagement part of it. But the new president has bought 100% into the fourth industrial revolution. This idea of technology becoming that fourth industrial revolution, but how humanities has to be a very important part of that. Otherwise, tech will run wild, and humans are, the whole apocalyptic thing. But basically, he's really supportive of that, and has incorporated that set of beliefs onto the whole campus. Not that it wasn't there earlier, but I think it's even stronger now. As a result of that, not only does our college, the College of Humanities, really put a fairly hefty weight on digital humanities-oriented projects, but other colleges are also. And so really it just depends on what the college is and how engaged the faculty are in that particular arena. But tenure and promotion committees are campus-wide, so we've had a number of faculty members that have gone forward with not only publications, but also DH projects, and they've received tenure and promotion. Myself being one of them. So. Other questions? Or are we?
I was going to say, why don't we break for brunch, and we'll come back and
we got some cool stuff to show you this afternoon.